Next up is the Shadow Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Let's give a big CPAC welcome to Ted O'Brien MP.
CPAC, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for having me here today. And I want to start with the words behind me, which is above CPAC. We are one. Australia, we have this unique part of our DNA that gives us the capacity to unite. We saw it last week with the Matildas, we'll see it tonight with them. We see it at times of national challenge, natural disaster. Australia has the capacity to unite. But what unites us? Have you ever thought about that? What unites us as Australians, it's not our heritage, it's not the colour of our skin, it's not our ethnicity, it's not our language, it's not our religion. There's one thing that unites us as Australians, and that is a common set of values. And there is no greater value than the value of freedom. Freedom of speech, freedom of association, freedom of religion, freedom to pursue whatever pathway it is you wish to pursue in your life. Freedom. Along with other values, including equality. To think that you can go to a citizenship ceremony in Australia and a new Australia from any corner of the planet at that moment becomes every bit as an Australian as our oldest Aboriginal, as our Prime Minister. Such is the value of equality. These values and others manifest themselves in our country, in our daily way of life, how we go about our lives, our friends, our families, our loved ones. Those values permeate everything. So if I'm talking here about a portfolio area that I manage, climate and energy, well, what's that got to do with our way of life? My answer to that is absolutely everything. Everything. Much is said in the debate in this country on climate change and energy about the year 2050. Due to the target of net zero by 2050. And I think the starting point for us in thinking about that isn't just about the challenge of decarbonising the Australian economy, but rather what will our way of life be in 2050? What sort of country do we want to be in 2050? Depending how old you are, 2050 can feel as though it's going to be tomorrow or it's a million miles away. On a personal level, for those I do not know, if there's one thing I'm proud of, it's my wife and my kids. I've got a little girl, a little boy, and my wife Sophia is pregnant with our next child, due in just less than 2 months. I think about what my children's life is going to be like in the year 2050. When my little girl is in her late 30s, my little boy early 30s, and my one yet to come late 20s. Will they live in a similar staunchly proud liberal democracy with all the freedoms that I was born with, that I was blessed to be inherited with? Will they have their way of life day to day as good as we've had it? I believe that as a nation, we should have a collective ambition that their lives, the lives of their peers, are every bit as good as what we've had, if not better. But that won't just happen. And I truly believe that how Australia tackles the challenges of climate and energy between now and mid-century will in a large part determine whether or not my kids and their peers have a way of life that we have come to enjoy. There is no guarantee. How we manage as a country climate and energy issues between now and 2050 will determine if mid-century our nation is rich or poor, if our nation is strong or weak, if our nation remains a fiercely independent liberal democracy or a fragile one captive to interests from afar that do not align to our own. If we mismanage our energy system between now and then, we will fall on the wrong side of that ledger. If we continue to go down the path that this socialist Labor government has laid out for Australia, we will be a poorer nation, a weaker nation, and a nation that will be captured by foreign interests that do not align to our own. And we can see that every day, and Australians do, through their power bill. And we all remember the echo of that promise that kept coming to the Australian people before the last election. You're going to get a $275 reduction in your household power bills under an Albanese government. A sad joke, a sick joke, selling a dream, delivering a nightmare. And still to this day, Labor peddles that untruth, waving around a report they call the Gen Cost report, which has been dismantled and flawed, which ignores tens of billions of dollars of investment, saying that their pathway is going to be cheap. And I think the everyday Australian knows that's not the case. Prices are only going up, and they will continue to go up. So too do we have issues with reliability. Labor promised that they have this pathway to decarbonise the Australian economy that will keep our electricity grid stable. But everyone from the market operator through to the ACCC is sending out big warnings saying that's not the case. The idea of wanting baseload power stations to close before we have any like-for-like replacement intact, ready to go, is economic madness. You don't close down one system without having another one to replace it. They're ready to go. As it stands today, because of the policy suites put in by this government, we have a race to the exit by coal-fired power stations. By 2035, 80% of Australia's baseload power will exit the grid, 80%, without any guarantee of a replacement. Now, some people have pointed to Germany and said Australia's going down the path of Germany, this race to renewables and the closure of baseload power stations. I get offended by that. Offended on behalf of Germany. Germany at least had the common sense to mothball their plants. Here in Australia, we are not connected to any nation. We are an island. It's us. We're not connected to any other grid. We're demolishing entirely our plants, in many cases just blowing them up, with no guarantee of a replacement. That, of course, impacts industry. It impacts every household. Industry already is on their knees with major big government interventions in the gas market, the introduction of a carbon tax on the promise that it's really good for industry, to only then fast forward by a few months and already they're saying, well, now we're going to have to introduce a tariff to protect the very industries we said the tax would be good for. Sovereign risk has gone up. Investment has gone down. Such is the poor policy suites of the socialist government. We have some American friends with us today. And so can I talk a little bit about a recent trip I did to the United States? I went to the US and Canada, as I have done some other countries, looking at clean energy solutions, including next generation zero emissions nuclear energy. There was a phrase used in the United States that I keep using now in Australia, and that phrase is all of the above. In recognition that it's going to be so difficult to get from today to 2050 that no government in their right mind would take options off the table. We need everything on the table, an all of the above approach. We need to be considering everything, and that includes zero emissions nuclear energy. Now, the United States, with a lot of commentary about hyperpartisanship, there has been a degree of bipartisanship, an emergence of bipartisanship around new nuclear energy. The left came at it from climate change. The right came at it from energy security. They both came at it, left and right, in recognition of the China question, the contest between the United States and China. And we all know that at the very peak of technology transfer, there's a decoupling taking place, whether it be space, artificial intelligence, virtual reality, semiconductors. Well, so too, nuclear energy falls within those buckets. China and Russia are ahead of the game, ahead of the United States, when it comes to go-to-market on next-generation nuclear technology. Small modular reactors are already commercialised and being sold in China. There is a geostrategic part of this argument. Within that context, let me put to you today that if we want to have a secure future for our kids and theirs, we will not have success with AUKUS unless we have a vibrant civil nuclear industry. Today, there are 6 nations that have nuclear-propelled submarines. 6. Australia will be the 7th. Every single one of those 6 also have a vibrant civil nuclear industry because of the interdependence between its submarine and civil sectors. This government says they're not even prepared to think about it. We also need to consider nuclear for our own energy purposes. What has been proven the world over is once you look at nuclear within a broad, diversified energy mix, prices come down, not go up. When I was in Ontario, I met with the minister. I looked at the departmental figures. Nuclear is one of the technologies driving prices down. That province alone, between 50 and 60% nuclear energy, the household power bills are less than half of what we pay in Australia. When I was in Japan, I also saw the figures from the department of where nuclear fits into their grid. And Japan has a complicated relationship, as we all know, with nuclear technology. But they're now wanting more of it. Why? It's stable, it's clean, it gets prices down. Yet here, Australia, the left of politics refuses to even contemplate that. Right across the world, we have 32 nations today that have nuclear energy. 32. There are another 50 nations on this planet looking at the possibility of nuclear energy for the very first time. 50. Why is the world racing towards next generation zero emissions nuclear energy? Because it's zero emissions. And because it has the ability to provide that same role that baseload power stations have always provided in stable grids. We shouldn't be closing our coal-fired power stations down prematurely. When they do retire, why would we not consider taking a lead from the likes of Wyoming in the United States that's putting a next-generation nuclear reactor on site, plugging into all the infrastructure, getting down capital costs? Common sense. For our own energy purposes, we should be considering this next generation of technology. But it's not just AUKUS. It's not just our own energy purposes. We should also be looking at our geostrategic interests. There are people who, in this country, who think they're the experts, they're politicians on the left, when it comes to nuclear energy. They are defying the economics done by many, many nations across the world and billions of dollars of investment. If small modular reactors, which are really small, so if there's like, let's say a 2,000 megawatt let's say coal-fired power station that gets closed down in Australia. So Liddell had the total capacity of around about 2,000. These small modular reactors, around about, most of them at the moment, that are around about 300 megawatts, right? So they're smaller. The micro ones, otherwise referred to as nuclear batteries, can be between 1 and 20 megawatts. The size of a 20-foot container, you bring them in, put it on a slab of concrete, you plug and play, is the degree of simplicity. If these are successful, and I believe they will be, and China and Russia are ahead of the game, I ask you this question. At what point in our future will smaller nations, including on our doorstep of the Pacific Islands, opt for a nuclear battery or a small modular reactor? If we cancel ourselves out of this game, we have no role in any of that. We have an opportunity as a nation to be ambitious for our future and to be thinking of our economic interests and our geostrategic ones. And when I go home and see my wife and kick the footy with my son and listen to my little girl sing, I want to know that we are doing everything we can to ensure that their future will be safe, that they will live in a country that is strong, not weak, that is rich, not poor, that is a vibrant, liberal democracy and not a weakened one, captured by others. And I want to know that we have a pathway to get there. And as we go towards 2050, and we come out with our policy as a united coalition of Liberal and Nationals, as I do a lot of the heavy lifting on that, there's a conclusion I have reached, and I want to share that with you in the final 10 seconds today. And that message is simply this: no nuclear, no net zero. Thank you very much.
Good on you, Ted. Put your hands together for Ted O'Brien, ladies and gentlemen.